Dean Baquet, and Marty Baron. Welcome to WBUR.
How are you? Can you hear me okay? Great. So I'll start with an easy one.
You need to put the mic next to your mouth. That's how it works here, Dean. You got to put the mic close to the mouth.
Okay, thank you.
Your knee doesn't do the talking.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
So as you can tell, we are friends. Marty and I have known each other since 1996. You said when we worked together at the New York Times. And if I can say, these jobs can be very lonely and difficult, and it's hard to find people you can talk to who are going through the same thing. And we did that a lot over the years.
Absolutely.
So an easy one. I think of you as a very private person and a person who, like a lot of editors, most editors, including me, are diplomatic in your public statements. Tell me why you decided to write a book and how you decided to write it. What was that like?
Well, first of all, thank you, Margaret, for the great introduction, and thank you, Dean, for doing this. I really appreciate it. A great friend and a great editor. I knew immediately after, certainly going to the Post. I was living history there. This is a legendary newspaper, helped bring down a previous president of the United States, of course. And then when Bezos acquired the paper, not that long after I got there, about 7 months after I got there, I knew that was going to be historic. And then in 2015, along comes Donald Trump. On the political landscape, a candidate unlike any that we had ever seen before, and then became president unlike any we had ever seen before. Although we may see him again. So that, I knew I was living through history, and I felt like I should keep a record of what's happening here. I'd be a terrible journalist if I didn't keep track of what was happening, and then after as I was thinking about retiring, I was thinking that somebody should tell this story. Nobody else is going to tell this story. It's an important story to be told. The role of the press in a democracy, and it's an important one to be told. Jeff Bezos wasn't going to tell the story, of course. His usual response to the press is no comment. And our publisher wasn't going to tell the story either, and I thought I should tell the story and shed some light on the role that we played at a perilous moment in American history, and in the transformation of the Washington Post as well.
One of the revelations to me was Bezos. One of the things that's described in the book is that the leadership of the New York Times and the leadership of the Washington Post would occasionally have dinner together in secret, partly because we didn't want people to know we were doing that exactly. But he was a revelation in the book because, first off, not surprisingly, he didn't meddle in the journalism. That was clear. What was surprising is how modern a thinker he was about journalism. He talked about what was valuable about print and what had to be preserved. He talked about what the future would hold for an institution like the Washington Post. He had big ambitions, but he sounded like, frankly, a good modern publisher. And also he sounded like someone who was willing to put up with the stuff that it took. And that was surprising to me.
Yeah, I didn't know what to expect. I was worried, obviously, because here was one of the richest people in the world. Here was a guy who had substantial commercial interests, obviously, commercial interests in Washington. They had a huge lobbying operation, which has only gotten bigger since then. They had work. They were doing work with the intelligence agencies. We had just published the leaks, the Edward Snowden leaks, about the National Security Agency, and that was hugely controversial. And there were people in the intelligence community and in Congress who were saying that people like me should have been sent to jail for that kind of work. So Amazon had big contracts with the CIA, so I didn't really know what to expect. But he seemed incredibly committed to the work we were doing, to really understand the role of the press in a democracy, and really committed to that. and he understood media pretty well. I mean, you made mention of the fact that he was able to synthesize the best qualities, for example, of a print newspaper. And so in one of the meetings, he went through those, look, the sense of hierarchy that you have in a print newspaper, the sense of the signals that it sent, where things were positioned, the sense that the idea that you can actually, a feeling of completion, that you can get through it, and then you feel like you know what's going on in the world. And he would say, well, how do we take those, we're not going to have print in the future, and maybe we'll have it for a while, but we're not going to have it forever. So how do we take those qualities and turn that into a digital product? And he sort of assigned us that task. But he also understood right from the beginning that he was going to have to confront a lot of pressures. He had read Katharine Graham's autobiography, which had won the Pulitzer, and he knew that there would be pressures from the government, and fully expected that, and seemed remarkably prepared to deal with that. And we had one of the first questions he was asked at the first town hall that he had with the staff was, how can you buy a newspaper when Amazon, whenever it's asked anything, just says no comment? And his basic answer was, well, you have the right to ask, and we have the right not to answer. And he said, you have to do what you do, and Amazon will do what it does. And he also said, look, you can cover me any way you want, and you can cover Amazon any way you want. And he actually lived up to that.
So I'll ask my first Donald Trump question, though there's going to be time for audience questions, and I bet others. So I would confess, and I think you would say the same thing, that we missed the story of the rise of Donald Trump. I would confess that we didn't understand this dramatic shift of an America that could go from electing Barack Obama to electing Donald Trump, and we were stunned. I mean, I remember the scene in my newsroom. We didn't even have a front page prepared that said Donald Trump won. We had Hillary Clinton page. Do you feel the same way? And if so, how did we miss it?
Well, I think our biggest mistake was actually before Donald Trump ever declared as a candidate for president. I think our biggest failure was not really taking the measure of the entire country, of not understanding that there was this level of grievance throughout the country, this anti-elitist sentiment, this populist feeling, this desire to punch so-called elites in the nose, in the face, especially the media, but a lot of others as well, a resentment against the presumed frontrunners. So the Bush family, Jeb Bush, for example, people hated the Bush family. Resentment of the Clintons as well. The resentment of sort of Washington generally, and a feeling that people had been ignored and been condescended to. And I think that we failed in not getting out in the country and anticipating a candidate like Donald Trump. Once he ran, I feel like we did a really good job of looking at his life and his career. I think the Times did a really good job as well. I mean, we actually produced an entire book on it called Trump Revealed, and assigned 20 additional reporters from all over the newsroom to look in depth at everything that he had done. In the same way that when I was here in Boston, we did with John Kerry and we did with Mitt Romney. So we wanted to find out everything that we could. It's true that in our newsroom, the politics staff felt quite strongly that Hillary Clinton was going to win that election. I didn't feel that way. I mean, so I was not a national politics expert. That's not how I had spent my career. But in a way, that was an advantage because I grew up in Tampa, Florida. I'm not part of Washington, and I've always felt that Washington lives in a bubble. And my sense was, look, it's a really divided country. All of our elections are split pretty evenly. That Hillary Clinton was an incredibly weak candidate. That Trump, throughout the campaign, seemed to be a Teflon candidate, with one exception: the story that we ran on the Access Hollywood tape, which almost brought down his campaign. Whereas the hits against her actually seemed to do damage to her campaign, and she had barely won really against Bernie Sanders, and that's pretty remarkable given that he was a self-declared socialist. So So I thought it was going to be close, and I was telling people that I thought he had 40 to 50% chance of winning, and so I was not surprised. But all of our initial stories were written. The stories that are written in advance were written as if Hillary Clinton was going to win, and at about 9 o'clock that night, everybody started rewriting those stories.
No, I remember. Put aside the question of are we prepared to cover Trump, because I think and I'm going to ask that. I think that's a different question. Are we better able to cover the America that supports Donald Trump? Are we better able to cover the divisions in the country? You think we're better prepared?
I think we have the capacity to do it. Do I think we're doing it really well? I don't think so, actually. I mean, I get bothered when people say, you can't do those stories about go talk to Trump supporters in the diner. That's such a caricature. It's such a caricature. I mean, the reality is that a huge portion of this country supports him. We need to understand what motivates them. Why do they think that way? What is it? What is eating at them? Why do they continue to support him despite all that's been written about him? And that's our job, is to get out there. We can't repeat the same mistake. It's something I say in the book, that we cannot repeat the same mistake that we made in not anticipating a Donald Trump. We need to understand what the sentiment is in this country. And do I think we're doing a lot of stories like that? No. And I'll give you an example, and it's not about sort of middle America and white America and older white males or anything like that. It certainly has nothing to do with diners. So. One of the things that's been observed pretty regularly now is that Latinos, for example, are shifting toward the Republican Party. So, and that's written as a statistic, a political statistic. But we need to find out, well, why is that, given that there's so much anti-immigrant sentiment among the leaders of the Republican Party? How is it that so many Latino immigrants actually are embracing the Republican Party despite that political rhetoric? Have I seen many stories? Have I seen any story, for that matter, of people sort of spending time with Latinos who are working on oil platforms in Texas, or wealthier Venezuelan immigrants in Florida, professionals, or Cuban Americans, or you name it, Latinos and all over the country who have decided to sort of lean toward the Republicans? What is it why is that? I mean, I can think of quite a few reasons for that. Mm-hmm. People who are working on the oil platforms are concerned about environmental regulations that might eliminate their jobs. A lot of the Latino community is culturally conservative. So there are many, many reasons. But have I seen good stories about that? I haven't. And I think that's a terrible mistake.
Do you think we pay a price in assessing the country by the fact that frankly the best news organizations are in places like New York, Washington, Los Angeles? So I always think, I grew up in a very Catholic community in New Orleans, and I always thought that the press struggles with religion because we live in places that are secular. Do you think we pay a price for where we are?
Yeah, and I tried to address that when I was at the Post, when we finally were recovering financially and we could start reestablishing a national staff, which we started to do. When we got some additional positions, I said, I don't want it to be in Chicago. I don't want it to be in San Francisco. I don't want it to be in the places like that. I want this to be in places like, we ended up putting one in Kansas City, and then we put another one in San Antonio. To cover border issues and West Texas and all of that. So I felt that we really needed to compensate for our blind spots. And do I think we're doing that well enough? I don't think so.
So let me shift to Trump himself. And I agree with you. I had the same. I bristled too when people said that the press didn't cover Trump aggressively. I actually think people know who they voted for. But it's even a more difficult story now, because whatever impulses Trump had when he ran the first time seem to be on steroids now. Are we better prepared to cover Trump himself, especially if he wins another term? What do you wish? What do you want to see in the press now that you're not sitting in a newsroom every day? about Trump himself? And then to be more specific, after you answer that, would you have done the famous CNN interview? And if you were editor of the Post and Donald Trump called up and said, I would love to do a live interview on your homepage, what would you say?
For Trump?
Yeah.
I would say no. I mean, why would we do that? I mean, it makes no sense. I mean, I thought the CNN interview was a disaster. First of all, it was way too early in the campaign to say, okay, this guy's the front runner. I mean, this is before DeSantis' campaign cratered and all of that. It's like way too early to declare a front runner. I mean, if you actually look at the predictions of who was the front runner for to be the nominee in 2016, well, it was Jeb Bush, and then it was one person after the next, except Donald Trump, right? So political punditry is just incredibly bad. And so I wouldn't pay much attention to it. So, but, I mean, I think what I would rather see, rather than just giving another platform to Trump, and by the way, NBC did it again with Meet the Press. And right. I mean, I think you have to, first of all, have to look at, well, what is the motivation for doing those interviews? So for CNN, the motivation was to show that they can have Republicans on and that it's not just a Democratic channel. And then for NBC, well, they had a new host for Meet the Press, so it's a way of creating buzz around a new host. None of those motivations has anything whatsoever to do with journalism. It has everything to do with entertainment. And so I think our motivations should be journalistic. And so what should we be doing now? I think we should be looking much harder at who would Trump appoint to run, to be members of his cabinet? Who would he appoint to run various regulatory agencies? What are the policies that are already being developed that he would endeavor to implement as soon as he comes into office? No doubt a second Trump administration would be a vengeance tour. He would be going after the Justice Department, the FBI, the press, the courts in some way, a lot of things. And we need to say, okay, well, what are they already developing today in anticipation that they could win and they plan to implement? I've seen some stories along those lines, but I haven't seen a lot of stories along those lines, and I think a lot more reporting needs to be done. And that's the difference. It's the differences between its reporting as opposed to just having Trump there and conducting an interview with him where he has the opportunity to repeat all his falsehoods. And he controls the conversation because he's a dominating kind of personality.
On that point, talk a little bit about, I mean, one of the trickiest things, I mean, and I'll come back to this later, we sort of had a rhythm to covering public figures that I'd argue Trump sort of blew up. Yeah. But I was thinking, now that I'm not running a newsroom, I was thinking last week when he decided to appear in court for 3 days at the hearing in New York, I was thinking, man, I know intellectually that he is doing this to sort of take over the coverage. Suddenly it goes from a very complicated testimony of an accountant for 3 days to television and all of us being able to show this sort of glaring Donald Trump. How do you put yourself in the head, once again, of the editor who's making daily decisions? Like, I know I'm being used, but how do you manage that? Just talk about that.
Yeah, well, I think in that instance, there should have been stories that say how Trump is trying to exploit this particular moment and explain that he's not there to actually see what's happening in court. He's actually there for entertainment purposes because he knows that the more he's seen as being, he wants to be seen as being persecuted, and by being there, he sort of creates this image that he's being persecuted and that he's trying to exploit that. And I think that we should write those kinds of stories. He's clearly benefited politically from the prosecutions, and he sees opportunity in being in court. There was no particular reason for him to be there.
Right.
And but it was a great. It's a show. I mean, look, the man is a showman. I mean, let's face it. I mean, go back to the beginning of his campaign in 2015. He comes down the escalator at the Trump Tower in New York, and with the gold and all that stuff. And it was and they brought in people actually off the street. They paid them basically to be there for him. He's a showman, and people like the show. I mean, there's a good portion of the country they like that show, but I think we have to portray it as a show that it is when he's clearly putting on a show.
So go back to that that notion that how much he changed our conventions. You know, I remember the debate in my office, and I'm sure you went through similar ones when we first used the word lie to refer to Trump. And I think about lie, and I think about fact check, and I think about there's clearly a tone to analysis pieces in. I mean, you cite in the book a very strong Dan Baltz piece that was like unlike anything Dan Baltz had written before. How many of those shifts in convention should stay with us? There's a great line that you quote in the book, How Democracies Die. And I wrote, lots of our critics cite this book, but few of them cite the warning that, as you say, the media feeling threatened, quote, may abandon restraint and professional standards. Did we do that? And which convention should we keep? What changes should we keep?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think there's some changes we made that were good. I think that we use more direct language to explain things, that we are more willing to call a lie a lie. I mean, I think our caution at the beginning was not unreasonable. We wanted to know, does he really know that what he's saying is not true? Because with Trump, it was often hard to tell whether he was just delusional or whether he really knew that what he was saying was true, or whether he wasn't. I quote in the book, there was a popular book some years ago, and I'm not going to use the word because it's being recorded, but it was on BS. It's called The Book by Harry Frankfurt. And BS, I mean, he's just making stuff up. He doesn't even know whether it's true or not. He just makes it up because it serves his purposes. And that's even worse than a lie because it shows no respect even for the truth, that the truth doesn't matter whatsoever. And so, but anyway, I think we use more direct language. I think that we've been good about showing the evidence more than we have in the past, putting the documents out there for people to see. I think all of that has been good. I think what has been bad is sort of performative outrage on the part of some journalists, particularly in social media, who feel they have to go to social media to express their own personal feelings, their own sentiments, their own feelings of hurt, all of that. And I think we should focus on the quality of our own work and the focus on our journalism, make sure the journalism is as strong as it can be, and let that journalism really speak for itself. I don't think it's helpful for people on the staff to be making comments that would never find their way into our newspaper or online, never into a story that we would publish, and make comments that are just expressions of their own personal opinions and their own personal sentiments of one sort or another, their hurt feelings or whatever it might be. And I think that undermines our credibility. I think we should focus more on how to ensure public confidence in the work we do rather than ensures an opportunity for personal expression.
Right. So let me ask you a personal one, because it's something that I experienced too. There were a couple moments in the book near the end, I guess 3/4 in, where you started to feel like this was a staff you didn't recognize, and some of it was about social media, and it was I could feel your pain, and it was painful. I got the sense you thought your newsroom was turning against you. You actually wrote a resignation letter because they were going after an editor you cared about. Talk a little bit about that sense that you were like the traditionalist. I feel the same way, by the way, that you were the traditionalist, and suddenly the game had changed, and you were sort of alone. And that was actually, as your friend, that was sort of like a sad moment in the book. Talk about that, how that felt and what that was like.
Yeah, so, writing those chapters was a trip down bad memory lane. And now you're asking me to go down that memory lane again.
Sorry.
So thank you. But I guess I'm here to talk. I'm here to talk about the book. So look, I am a traditionalist. I mean, I look there. That quote that you had was out of How Democracies Die by two Harvard professors, which a lot of people have read. And I think we have to be really careful as politicians, and particularly Trump and Republican Party, abandon all standards of behavior that we've expected in politics, all norms of behavior that have come to sort of had traditionally defined our politics, and they throw those out the window. I think we have to be really careful to sort of not throw our own standards out the window along with that. I think that will undermine democracy as well. And so I feel like we should stick to our standards and our traditional standards, and that is doing rigorous work, doing it in an open-minded fashion, being comprehensive, all of that, and then doing work that stands up and presenting that to the public so that they can make their own decisions. But we had a staff that, the people were expressing themselves on Twitter in particular, where saying things that we would never have put in, we would never said in the paper, online, or anywhere, and that violated standards that we actually had, that everybody was given on the day they started employment. They understood what they were, and yet they decided to defy them. And I endeavored to, most of the time we would just give people informal warnings, but when people would repeat the behavior, we finally would give them disciplinary warnings, a formal disciplinary letter, and that was rare. There were probably 8 of them in my entire time at the Post, and I was there for about 8 years, so 1 a year really. So, but a couple of those confrontations led to essentially uprisings among the staff, and I had, because of one particular reporter's social media activity, and we put her on administrative leave because of that. And there was a petition of about 400 or so people on the staff objecting to that, calling into question our management, our enforcement of these policies, arguing that they were unequally enforced, and all of that. And all of that got written about everywhere. And that was really dispiriting because when we had subsequent meetings about our social media policy, everybody was talking about their need to express themselves, that they couldn't be one person at home and a different person at work, that kind of thing. And I didn't agree with that. We ask a lot of people to be a different person at work. We ask judges to do that. We ask cops to be professional. We ask a lot of people. We ask doctors to behave professionally. I don't really care what their political opinions are. I don't want to see those political opinions expressed in the doctor's office or in the enforcement of the laws by police or whatever it might be. So, my view is that we can be you can have your own personal opinions, but don't bring that with you to work, and certainly don't express that to the public. And because people were brought there to be reporters, which means to get outside of themselves, not to be obsessed with themselves and their own personal feelings. And our mission is really to get outside of ourselves. So I really did feel this incredible. And when we went to those meetings, people were talking about, well, they used the words, I, me, mine, that sort of thing. And I'm thinking about the institution. Our, we, us. What do we stand for? What are our institutional standards? And people didn't seem to care about that. And so there was a chasm between me and the staff.
Yeah. Do you think some of that, I watched the testy Jake Tapper exchange, but do you think some of that, there's a Tom Rosenstiel said once that every generation gets to make its own journalism. I don't think he meant exactly what we were talking about, but there were some challenges to me. I went through something similar that I came to think were healthy, that was a better alternative to the world I grew up in when the executive editor walked in the room and everybody snapped to attention, right? God, I wish that were. I long for those days.
I don't remember anybody snapping to attention, frankly, but,
It's a slight exaggeration.
Yeah.
But how do you feel about, do you think, put aside social media, do you think they're right about some of the stuff that they challenge us on?
Well, it depends what. I mean, of course. Yeah. I mean, I think that obviously newsrooms haven't been diverse enough over the years. They were largely white and male. I mean, certainly going back, it's improved, but there's a lot more work to be done, and we need all of those perspectives. We need incredible diversity in our newsrooms on racial grounds, ethnic diversity, but also, people's life experiences. People who came from different, with their working class backgrounds. I'd like to see more people who've served in the military in our newsrooms. Here we had been at war for so many years. I mean, there are very few people in our newsrooms who had actually served as veterans. And so I wanted to see more of that. So I think all of that is really good because we need to hear different perspectives because I won't see stories that other people will see. I won't know perspectives that other people have. So I think all of that is important. But I reject this idea that that everybody should just sort of express their feelings. Completely reject that. I mean, particularly on the stories, particularly the sensitive stories that we cover. I mean, I think it's worth stepping back and saying, why do we have editors exactly? Okay. So what is the role of an editor? The role of an editor is to determine who's going to cover a story, who are the most appropriate, based on their expertise, their experience, their judgment, things like that. And then working with those reporters, decide how we're going to cover that story based on the institutional standards that we have long had, and that they will reflect those standards. They will help shape those standards for the future, and it's a collective decision making, particularly on the most sensitive stories that we have. What happens when you take all this care with the story that you write, you work on how the story is written, the words that you use, the photo that you select, the headline that you're going to have, and out of the blue, somebody on the staff who has no involvement in the story whatsoever decides that they're going to tweet about this stuff in a way that they didn't ask you about. You didn't ask them to tweet on it. They didn't. They decided, no, I've decided we're going to do it I'm going to do it my way, and that can be hugely disruptive. You know, with look, I mean, in Boston, we had the Catholic Church cover-up story. I look back on that and say, thank God there was no social media at the time, okay? Thank God, okay? So we published the first stories in January of 2002. There was no Twitter, there was no Facebook, there was none of that. We did have the internet, but that's about it. So, you know, look, I mean, so we took great care with what those stories said, how we wrote those stories, the headlines. You know, in the movie Spotlight, I'm portrayed as taking out adjectives, which I did. I did as many as I could find. I took those adjectives out because I thought that, you know, I don't want the church to focus on sort of provocative language and try to discredit the work. Just let the evidence speak for itself. But can you imagine if we had done those stories and then out of the blue, somebody who wasn't involved in those stories started to go, if we had Twitter at the time, decided, you know, I think we need to make a point about celibacy here, or we need to make a point about this or that. And that would have so discredited the work we did. It would have given it would have given ammunition to the church to discredit, to question our motives, and to give Catholics in this community and elsewhere an opportunity to question what we were really all about. What was our motive? And I am so glad we didn't have that. But today we do have that. And we see exactly that kind of activity. We can take enormous care with the stories that we work on, and then out of the blue, somebody says something that creates an enormous storm and reaction. And what becomes the representation of our institution? Not all the work that we took great care with, but this one thing that becomes the subject of enormous controversy because one person felt they needed to express themselves.
So I got time for one last question, then we'll switch to the audience. And it's one that I think about a lot. So for several years now, we've had an American president calling us names, calling us fake news, attacking reporters personally, not to mention pushing conspiracy theories. How do we win back our credibility? How do we combat that and convince people just how determined we are to report and tell the truth and that he's wrong?
Yeah, well, it's a huge challenge, and I think it's the biggest question for our profession right now is how do we do that? I do believe it means that we have to stick to traditional professional standards. I do believe that it means we have to be as transparent as possible about how we went about our work and the evidence that we've actually gathered and show all of that evidence. And then not engage in what I would consider performative outrage and distractions that give people cause to question our judgments. And finally, I think that we have to spend time in communities to show that we're actually interested and understand their worries, their concerns, their aspirations, their frustrations, all of that, that we actually are, we're not condescending, we're listening, and that we should listen generously to what it is, what their lives are like, and they should see themselves, and this is for all communities, that they should see themselves reflected in our coverage, fairly and honestly and honorably, and I think we have to show that we know they exist, we know that they are struggling, and many people are, and they have to be able to see that in our coverage and say, okay, well, they get us, okay? So I think that's really important. And I think we have to stop thinking that we got to get everybody to agree, okay, to accept what we publish. And look, at any one moment, there probably 25 to 35% of this country believes in some sort of conspiracy theory that has no basis in fact, right? Whether it's denial of the Holocaust, or whether it's vaccines cause autism, or whether it's the election of 2020 was completely, was illegitimate, all of that. You always look at those numbers, it's somewhere between 25 and 35% consistently. Probably not going to reach those people. So can we reach another 5%? Let's try with that. Okay, can we reach another 7%? Great, maybe 10%. You do that and you change the country.
So now we're going to go to audience. I'm going to ask members of the audience to raise their hands for questions, but I want to say one thing. It's a terrific book. It really is.
Thank you.
So.
Thanks, Steve.
Should reporters put outrageous behavior into analogies common people would recognize, and maybe, similar to what somebody like Trump has done? Would you, when your son does something like this, how would you react?
Are you talking about his personal behavior?
Yeah, and things he's done politically, but put it into a setting that ordinary people will recognize in person-to-person exchanges.
So the question is, so how should we be describing his own personal behavior so that people could?
Political behavior.
It's a tough. It's a general question. Look. I forget whether he said he hasn't been any different from when he was in third grade or 3 years old. I don't know, but what difference does it make, right? So, look, in the book I talk about how he called me to complain at one point that we had reported on him as if he were a child. And then he said, and I thought I'd never hear these words from the President of the United States. He said, "I am not a child," which to me was childlike response in and of itself. So I was just sort of stunned by the whole thing, and I just really, this is the President of the United States. So, I would never say that to anybody, but I am not a child. We have described his behavior. There were so many stories written about in the Times and in the Post about what was happening in that White House, his bizarre behavior, his fits of rage, his lack of attention. There have been books now written about, how we take national security documents and flush them down the toilet. Maggie Haberman wrote that in her book. I don't know. I don't think that that's going to persuade anybody, frankly, because, as I said, watch the rally. Some of that's pretty juvenile too, right? So, at one point he was calling Bezos, he called him Jeff Bozo. I don't know. I don't think I even did that in third grade, but I really don't. I don't think I called anybody like that. I've made fun of their names, and he makes fun of everybody's names. And so I don't think that's, going to have a significant impact. I think people have to understand, what is he going to do to the country? What is he going to do to the country? And the American people have to make that decision, but they should know what's ahead. We should never, after the next election, we should not, we in the press should not be able to look back and say, we forgot to mention that. We need to show what he intends to do, what the country is going to look like almost immediately after he takes office. He is done things that are, it suggests strongly, and there's a lot of evidence that he's an aspiring authoritarian. I mean, it's the reality. I mean, he's talked about executing Mark Milley, the outgoing chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He's talked about bringing treason charges against NBC. He's talked about using the military to suppress totally legitimate protests in this country. All of that is evidence of authoritarianism. And I think that's what we need to tell people about. And then the American people will have to make their choice.
So raise your hand. I think someone other, because I can't see through the light, is going to call on people.
Marty, do you have any thoughts about what journalism schools can be doing to help reinforce these foundational beliefs that you've been talking about this evening?
Perhaps go a little bit of foundational beliefs in journalism, Ian. Yeah, perhaps go a little lighter on the personal branding for journalists, How about that? They're all coming out of journalism schools having been told that they need to cultivate their personal brands. And maybe they do, okay? Because, look, I mean, they can't expect that they're going to work for the same journalistic institution their entire career. They don't expect loyalty from the institution. I get that. So why do they owe loyalty back? But they need to understand that whatever brand they decide to cultivate can't be in conflict with the brand of the institution they're planning to go work for. It can't actually undermine the brand and identity. I mean, we at the Post wanted an identity for ourselves, and some of the activities of the people on the staff on social media were actually undermining the brand that we wanted for ourselves. And it's like, I'm sorry, in that contest, the institution's going to have to win, okay? Because we have the right to define who we want to be as an institution. And so I think that needs to be taught in journalism schools, certainly. Look, there's a lot of great work going on in journalism schools. There are a lot of great journalists coming out of schools. I'm on an advisory board for one, and there's a lot of talent. I mean, just a lot of talent out there. So people have like really tremendous skills, and but I think that one thing I wish there were more classes that dealt with sensitive judgment calls, and that people could have open and honest debates about what's the right thing to do. And I fear that can't happen in journalism schools today because somebody will take offense, be triggered, or whatever it is. And so, and that's the real world we live in, and those are the kinds of issues people are going to have to deal with. And I think they should have to. There should be opportunities to discuss really tough judgments that have to be made.
I'll add one sentence: more emphasis on reporting, and being open-minded in reporting, and not doing reporting that just sort of buttresses the stuff you believed.
Yeah, I remember you, in accepting an award, were talking how you went around and you talked to a lot of your reporters about what you ought to talk about, and one of them was Jason DeParle.
Right.
And do you want to say? Do you remember what he said?
I'll
remember.
Oh,
what he said.
you remember.
I remember what you said about what he said. So he said that if I end a story, if I conclude a story and it's exactly what I thought it would be at the beginning, then I haven't done my job.
That's right. More questions. We're going to finish at 8, I'm told. So more questions?
Yes, a question. Any comment on Rupert Murdoch and what Fox News has done to journalism?
Well, it doesn't really practice much journalism, actually. So it's not really journalism. It's commentary and totally aligned with the Republican Party. And all you need to do is look at the evidence that emerged in the defamation suit brought by Dominion Voting to see exactly what was happening. Not even so much behind the scenes, some of it just quite openly. So, I think the problem with Fox News is that previous presidents never had to deal with a major media organization, so day in and day out, telling you that the country's going to hell, that everything is disastrous, that your lives are at risk just by leaving your home, that there's a murder around every corner, that the economy is collapsing, or whatever it might be. That's just that's a joke. But now presidents do have to deal with that, and that's a permanent presence. It appears on the political landscape right now, and I just don't think that's going away.
First, I'd like to thank you for an extraordinary, thoughtful discussion. But to go back to Rupert Murdoch, you've talked about how Jeff Bezos intercalated himself into the Washington Post. Rupert Murdoch's also intercalated himself into the Wall Street Journal. I'm wondering how you feel about the state of, or the position of the Wall Street Journal vis-a-vis the West Coast principal media print outlets such as the Times and the Washington Post. Is there really a firewall between the opinion pages and the news pages of the Wall Street Journal as you, as intelligent observers, look upon them?
You know, I don't know much about what's happened inside there. I think the Wall Street Journal news department has done some really good work. They did some really good and tough work on Donald Trump, too, particularly about his payoffs for his affairs and things like that. So, the news department, I think, has done a really good job, particularly in more recent years. The editorial page and some of the opinion columnists, well, that's a world of its own. So.
So the Times and the Post survived the internet, social media, but a lot of papers didn't. And I'm just curious as to what's the economic health right now of the leading publications and your ability to really advance your craft. In a world in which you have competition from everyone who has a website.
Yeah. Well, I also want Dean to talk about it because he's spending a lot of time with local news organizations as well. So, the state of the industry is pretty bad. A lot of newsrooms are cutting staff one after the next. There are a lot of so-called news deserts, places that don't have any media coverage whatsoever. But I also think there are signs of optimism, and some of that is right here in Boston with Boston Globe, with WBUR. I think you're blessed to have pretty vibrant news coverage here, and you should be grateful for that, and I'm glad you support it. So, there are other places. Minneapolis seems to be doing okay, San Francisco, Dallas. There's some nonprofits that have emerged that seem to be doing pretty well. The Texas Tribune, even though they had some layoffs, but they've grown quite a bit over the years. Cal Matters in California, that's done quite well, and some smaller nonprofits as well. And now, you have something called the National Trust for Local News, which is acquiring some commercial enterprises and has acquired a bunch of newspapers in Maine, and now just is creating a whole network in Georgia, like around Macon and towns around there. And I think that's really encouraging. But overall, we got a real problem. I mean, a lot of these papers are being acquired by private equity firms and hedge funds, and they're treating these things like annuities. They're just extracting every last penny of cash they can out of them, and they're happy to see once they get a good return, they don't care if these things disappear. But what are you seeing, Dean?
The Times is doing. I mean, thank God, the Times is doing fine, and I think in the long haul, the Post is going to do fine. And I think you're right about the regional, the Globe, and some others. Overall, the state of local journalism, particularly in poorer communities, is pretty bad. I've spent a lot of time in Mississippi because the fellowship program that I run, we've placed some investigative reporters in Mississippi. It's hard. It's rough. I don't know there's some really compelling nonprofits, but they're dependent on local philanthropy. There's not a lot of local philanthropy in places like Mississippi and Alabama. It's rough. It's hard. And I don't know what the business model looks like. The good news, and then I'll shut up so we have time for one more question, a tremendous amount of energy, a tremendous amount of innovation. I mean, I talked to a group of journalists in Jacksonville, Florida, who only write about the criminal justice system in Jacksonville. 3 people, 3-person staff, very focused, terrific daily coverage. I'm amazed they can pull it off. That's one of the benefits of the era we're in. So that's the good news, and I'd love to see more of that. I think we have time for one more question.
If I could ask a 2-part question. One is, what are the concrete things that can happen to convince 70 million plus people not to support Trump? And the much more important question is, what odds do you give it that that might work?
Yeah, you should be a reporter. I got one question, which is two parts. So that's the way it works. It's just one question, but it has two parts. As I said before, I mean, I don't think you should think about the 70 million people. I think you should think about, you know, and I'm not talking in terms of supporting Trump or not supporting. I'm talking about embracing fact versus fiction. Okay, let's talk about that. Okay, and so I would say that I think we can reach people. That there are enough people, including among those who supported Trump, who are open to actual evidence, open to actually looking at the facts, evaluating them. If they're presented with them in the right way and with the right tone and all of that, and in a transparently show them the evidence, all of that. I think there are enough people who are open to that to say, okay, another 5 million, maybe more, whatever it is. I think that can work, absolutely. I mean, look, you know, with regard to Trump himself, I mean, everybody says, oh, nothing's reaching anybody. But I'm sorry, he lost the House in 2018. He lost the presidency in 2020. And the Republicans lost the Senate, okay? And they did that, that's the American people made their decision. I mean, the Republican Party wasn't willing to sort of counter Trump to say that, you know, he did anything wrong on January 6th, certainly not enough to impeach him. But the American public at some point, based on what they knew about Trump, about him as a person and him as a president, they said, we've had enough. You know, that he got voted out of office. I mean, and when you actually, certainly in the Electoral College, but in the overall popular vote, obviously was even bigger. So are people open to that? Yeah. I mean, do I wish more people would accept the 2020 election as legitimate? Yeah. But a significant majority actually do today. And among independents, there's been a bit of a movement toward accepting that election as a legitimate election, and it will take time. So I think we need to look over the long run and be patient and just keep working at it. Just keep working at it.
Thanks, Marty. I think we're going to turn it over to Margaret. This was great. You're done.
Thank you, Dean, and thank you, Marty. It is a profound honor to have you on the City Space stage. So another round of applause to two of the most extraordinary leaders in journalism. I know that there were more questions in the audience, and I suspect you could have kept this audience wrapped for several hours more. Dean, I have to commend you. You've never been a broadcaster, but you knew how to hit your post, and I congratulate you on that. He was watching the clock. He knew when to get on and off. I want to thank all of you. I want to thank you for your support of quality journalism. I want to thank you for your support of WBUR. We are indebted to you. And so I think I'd like to give all of you a round of applause for everything you do to make us whole. So. Out in the hall, in the reception hall, there are books, signed books by Marty. We actually put him to work upstairs in the afternoon. He said it reminded him of that famous I Love Lucy TV show where she's got the chocolates coming down the aisle. Anyway, all the books are signed, ready, and waiting for you. Thank you for everything. You look like you wanted to say something.
Well, I just apologize for my signature. That's all. You're just going to have to take it the way it is. Sorry.
Take the signature along with the great book. Have a wonderful night. Thank you all so much.